Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea's Nuri space rocket prepares for launch after 2 delays in the past week. It's set to be moved to the launch pad before its rescheduled launch on Tuesday. With South Korea's fuel prices rising to all-time highs, the government has announced a further fuel tax cut, this time to the legal maximum. The government has also announced more support to stabilize people's livelihoods, which includes tax cuts on food and utilities. Beginning Monday, the government eases COVID-19 restrictions on nursing homes and other facilities for elderly people. Now, in-person visits will be allowed regardless of vaccination status, while elderly people who have received a 4th dose of a COVID-19 vaccine are free to leave centers.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Monday, June 20th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Oh Seong.
And I'm Yongsan. Thanks for tuning in this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, South Korea's homegrown space rocket Nuri is moving towards its launch pad as we speak, ahead of its second launch.
The rocket's being transported 1.8 kilometers from where it was assembled on a carrier vehicle at a speed of 1.5 kilometers an hour. Nuri is scheduled to reach the launch pad at around 8:30 a.m. and be upright next to the umbilical tower at around 11 a.m. Engineers at the Naro Space Center in Gyeongju, Jeollanam-do Province will then connect the umbilical cables, a process that will be complete by 7 p.m. if all goes according to plan. The cables will provide the rocket with fuel and oxidizers tomorrow before the launch.
Now, as we mentioned just now, the launch date for South Korea's first homegrown space rocket Nuri has been set June 21st.
It comes after a series of events, including bad weather conditions, a technical glitch, and then a miraculous recovery. Our Han Song-woo, who's been covering the historic event on site at the Naro Space Center, provides a timeline of what's been happening so far.
June 14th, 7 a.m. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute and the Ministry of Science and ICT delay Nuri's second launch, originally scheduled for June 15th, 24 hours due to strong winds.
Today's weather forecast posed obstacles to the transportation of the rocket, and once it's erected, the screening of umbilical cords and connecting the cables could have been dangerous for the engineers.
Rise and shine June 15th. At the Naro Space Center in Gyeongju, Jeollanam-do Province, where in one day, South Korea's first homegrown space rocket would blast off from. With Nuri still next to the umbilical tower, engineers realize something's not right with the oxidizer level sensor in the 3-stage rocket's first stage. Its readings static when they're supposed to change in value. An issue that didn't arise during its first launch last year, which failed to put a dummy satellite into orbit after the rocket's 3rd stage burned out earlier than expected. Officials concluding at the time the loosening of a fixture holding a helium tank inside the 3rd stage's oxidizer tank was the problem. And on June 15th at 5:15 p.m. comes the decision to postpone the launch indefinitely.
After trying to figure out the issue at the launch pad, we realized it was not possible to get up close and analyze the problem while it's standing up. That's why we decided it's impossible to carry out the launch at the moment.
With the monsoon season also approaching, fears mount that an issue with the sensor itself, not the electric cable or terminal box, could require the separation of Nuri's first two stages and push the launch well past June 23rd, the last day of the rocket's alternative launch window. Then on June 17th at 5:30 p.m., a miracle. Authorities announced they replaced the core of the oxidizer level sensor in Nuri's first stage that was malfunctioning without disassembling the rocket, and confirm the sensor now works fine.
At first, we thought Nuri's first and second stages would have to be separated to replace the problematic sensor itself, but researchers at the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, after close examination, found the issue could be solved by replacing just one key part that was malfunctioning.
Hence, a new launch date, June 21st. And now all that's left, Nuri soaring into the skies, so that South Korea can become the world's 7th country to launch a space rocket independently capable of placing a satellite weighing over a ton into orbit using domestic technology. 한성우, Arirang News, 고흥.
With South Korea's fuel prices rising to all-time highs as they are in many countries, the government has announced a further fuel tax cut, this time to the legal maximum. Along with the measure on fuel, the government has announced more support to stabilise people's livelihoods, which includes food prices and utilities. Jeong with more.
With gasoline prices hitting daily record highs in many countries around the world, the South Korean government is trying to ease the burden on local drivers. Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho announced at an emergency meeting on Sunday that the tax cut on fuel will be increased to the highest level allowed by law.
Starting from July, in order to lower the prices of petroleum goods, there will be a further cut to the fuel tax to the legal cap of 37%.
It's already been cut by a record 30%, with the fuel tax now at around 40 US cents per liter. Under the new measure, there'll be an additional cut of 5 cents a liter. Fuel prices in South Korea have trended higher for a 6th week in a row, hitting record highs. According to the oil price website OPNet, run by the Korea National Oil Corporation, the average price of gasoline on Sunday was roughly 2,108 won per liter. That's more than $1.60 depending on the exchange rate, breaking a 10-year high. Diesel, which has usually been cheaper than gasoline, has also risen to an all-time high, surpassing gasoline at around 2,116 won. With fuel prices soaring, the government will also provide tax benefits for people who are choosing to take public transport.
From the second half of this year, the income tax deduction rate will be doubled to 80% when public transport fares are paid by card.
He added that the government will also work to bring down food prices. It's going to closely monitor supply, provide discounts, and remove import duties on certain items that are likely to see price surge further. To further minimize the hit to consumers, the government is going to minimize the increase in utility bills as well.
Although production prices are rising amid the surge in global energy prices, the government, through painstaking effort, will minimize the hike in electricity and gas bills.
Chu also announced support for living expenses for those in groups deemed socially vulnerable. From this coming Friday, payments of 1 million won each, or about $770, will be distributed to some 2.3 million households on low incomes. Jeong, Arirang News.
Nuclear regulators in the UAE have issued an operating license for the third unit of the Barakah nuclear power plant built by South Korea. The Korea Electric Power Corp on Sunday said that the subsidiary operator NAWA will start loading fuel and prepare for a commercial operation. The CEO of KEPCO said that the company has achieved one more of its goals now that 3 out of its 4 units of the nuclear plant have been licensed. The Baraka nuclear power plant is the Arab world's first multi-unit operating nuclear energy plant in Abu Dhabi. The construction contract was won by KEPCO in 2009, marking the first export of a homegrown commercial atomic power plant by South Korea. Starting Monday, South Korea will allow unvaccinated visitors at nursing hospitals. Previously, only fully vaccinated or those with a virus infection record were allowed to visit in person. And while there will be no cap on the number of visitors, reservations must be made in advance and a negative COVID-19 test result submitted. Also starting Monday, patients at these facilities are free to go outside if they've had 4 shots or have been infected after getting 2 shots of the vaccine. The ease restrictions come as the country's daily cases have remained below the 10,000 mark for the last 10 days, largely due to a boost in natural immunity following the massive Omicron outbreak. However, health authorities are preparing for another wave in the fall as people's immunity will likely weaken.
Now, French President Emmanuel Macron's alliance has secured the most seats in the final round of parliamentary elections held on Sunday. However, projections show that the president's central alliance have lost their parliamentary majority, which could hinder Macron's future national projects. Kim Yongsan has more.
It was a defeat for French President Emmanuel Macron and his allies as they lost their absolute majority in the National Assembly on Sunday. Projections show Macron's Ensemble alliance will take between 210 and 240 seats, which is much less than the 289 required to have a straight parliamentary majority. While the results still mean Macron's alliance will be the biggest party in the next 577-seat assembly, falling short of the majority means the newly re-elected president may be forced into alliances with other parties. The left-wing alliance described the results as a, quote, total defeat.
It's a totally unexpected situation, absolutely unprecedented. It's a total defeat of the president's party and there is no majority.
The right-wing National Rally is projected to register a huge surge with potentially over 80 seats, up from just 8 before.
The new faces that you will discover, faces beaming with enthusiasm and life, are the vanguard of this new political elite that will take responsibility for the country when the new Macron adventure comes to an end.
The outcome of the vote could further slow down and hinder progress on a number of Macron's policies, as it relies on Parliament for many of its most important national projects, including tax cuts, pension reform, and raising the country's retirement age. Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy visited soldiers on the southern front line on Saturday, after which he vowed that his country would not give away south to anyone. He visited the war-damaged southern city of Mykolaiv, about 550 kilometers south of Kyiv, for the first time since the Russian invasion. Russian forces reached the outskirts of the area in early March, but were then driven back to the eastern and southern edges of the region where the fighting is ongoing. It's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. The Yoon administration announced its economic policy last Thursday in a bid to overcome the heightened economic uncertainty. The new policy direction also comes as the Korean economy faces a risk of stagflation and a mix of slowing growth and high inflation.
The new roadmap centres on deregulation and tax cuts in an effort to prop up private sector-led growth. And to get an expert's analysis on the changes ahead, we connect with Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Very good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning.
Well, first off, among the many policy changes that we've seen, which one stood out the most for you, Professor?
Okay, well, the plan itself encompasses a wide array of policies, some of which are very detailed and some of which are not really worked out. So they are saying that they'll have some more concrete plans for those policies in a few weeks or a few months. It has 4 major pillars. First, regulatory reform and private investment inducements, job creation policies, SME policies. The second pillar is various reforms, public sector reforms, pension reforms, labor market reforms, education reforms, financial sector and service sector reforms. The third pillar is basically R&D and industrial policy, trying to set up strategic industries for Korea and have carbon neutral policies in place. The fourth pillar is the social safety net and more incentive to work, improvements in the welfare system. And the fifth pillar is the short-term problems dealing with the high inflation and economic security, supply chain security. Now, what I like about the emphasis of these plans overall is that they're much more market-based, civilian sector-led than the previous administration. The regulatory reform is taking the center stage, not only for the first pillar, but for other pillars as well. So I do like that aspect of it. But again, this is a very wide-ranging plan. It encompasses virtually all areas of micro, macro, and industrial policies. So it's really very difficult to grade this plan on a single grade, but most of the policies are medium-term and long-term based. It has to do with changing the fundamentals, which Korean economy does need. But it also means that because of that, we may not see any results in the short run. And because the high inflation and worries about the supply chain that is short-term based, people may be disappointed, at least in the beginning, that we are not going to see that much results in the short run.
Like you said, I mean, it really just covers a whole range of different fields here. But I want to kind of go into certain topics, specifically the Yoon government, of course, cutting corporate taxes to encourage companies to expand investment. What it did was it lowered the maximum rate to 22% from 25%, which is quite interesting because the previous Moon administration, right, raised it from 22 to 25 back in 2017. But I guess the big question is, I mean, is the tax cut enough to make any kind of significant improvements?
Well, what we see in other countries which make corporate tax cuts is that it may work out in the longer term, but in the short term, we may not see that much of a change. Now, cutting the top corporate tax rate has been a request from the business sector for a long time, but there has been some criticism that rather than just cut the top rates, they should have cut rates for everybody so all businesses can take advantage of the corporate tax cuts. But when we see, say, corporate tax cuts that took place in the United States a few years ago, we see that it doesn't necessarily increase investment or increase jobs in the short run. In order to do so, companies really need to be confident that they are going to make profits when they make investments or increase the number of jobs. So it sets up the stage for possible investment increases and job creation, but it does not necessarily make it happen unless the demand cooperates as well. So we may not see the effect of the tax cut until we have an upward swing in demand. And I'm sorry to say that that's not going to happen in the near future.
And Professor, well, to revitalise the corporate sector, the Yoon administration, its policy direction, it's all about cutting red tape. And what kind of regulatory measures were in place that were really hindering innovation and growth in the first place? And what are your thoughts on the Yoon administration's focus on the corporate sector?
Okay, during the presidential campaign, the regulations that candidate Yoon had mentioned during his campaign was the 52-hour workweek rule. Now, even though you're supposed to work 52 hours per week, there is some leeway. You can work more than 52 hours if you have average of 52-hour workweek over 3 months. but business sector have been saying that 3 months is much too short a period to average out the work week because, well, a lot of businesses work on annual cycles rather than 3-month cycles. So that's one regulation that President Yoon has promised to change. Other ones are zoning regulations and land, because a lot of large companies have problems building factories because of these regulations. And then there's the LTV, the loan to value, and DTI, debt to income regulations, which keep young people from buying houses. President Yoon has promised to loosen those regulations as well. But it's not just these particular regulations that the business sector is complaining about. Korea is known as having one of the toughest regulatory environments in the world, very burdensome. So the government wants to get rid of a lot of regulations that businesses find very burdensome. And they did. It is forming the centerpiece of the current economic plans. It's listed as the first policy that they're going to implement, and it's setting up task force composed of the Vice Minister for Economic Affairs, as well Vice Minister of Economic Affairs, as well as various ministers for economic ministries, and they're going to have regular meetings with representatives from the corporate sector to see which regulations that they can get rid of. Now, this is, I think, a very hopeful sign that this government will get rid of burdensome regulations, unnecessary regulations. But also, the governments have tried this before, and they have not made it work because they lacked political will. They lacked some skills to determine which regulations should be eliminated. And because of problems with various interest groups who have interest that they on some of these regulations that they do not want to get rid of. So there is going to be a lot of problems trying to reform these regulations. We'll have to see whether the Yoon government has the will strong enough to get beyond these interest groups and try to streamline regulatory structure in the Korean economy.
We'll also have to see whether or not 5 years is enough to cover all those different, issues to resolve here. Professor, unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. But again, thank you very much for your insights, and looking forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you.
And that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around. Coming up next in the second half is peace becoming impossible as more and more conflict and military tensions around the world continue to grow? We're going to find out more during Global Insights, so don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever.
And welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. President Yoon invited citizens and residents of Yongsan to his office on Sunday to celebrate the relocation of the presidential office, with remodeling almost complete.
Invited were some 400 people, including small business owners impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as children, including young Afghan refugees. Following the move to Yongsan from the Blue House, President Yoon thanked his neighbours for welcoming him and his staff and vowed to work to make the district prosper as the centre of Seoul. Sunday's event included an exhibition of children's drawings, food booths and flea markets operated by small merchants in the district. A priceless relic that's seen as one of the finest examples of metalwork from the unified Silla period has been unveiled. With ultra-thin engraving and exquisite detail, the gold leaf artifact left experts speechless. Our Kim Bo-kyung provides a closer look.
Unbelievable. This can't be something that's man-made. The words of experts after seeing a gold leaf artifact unearthed from South Korea's Donggung Palace and Walji Pond in November 2016. Gyeongju National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage finally unveiled this sophisticated, outstanding gilt relic from the 8th century on Thursday. The artifact was initially discovered as two separate pieces, situated approximately 20 meters apart from one another. But after going through a conservation process, it was found to have been one single artifact. Bird and flower patterns are intricately engraved on the thinly spread out gold that measures 3.6 centimeters by 1.17 centimeters. The jaw-dropping patterns are carved at a thickness of 0.05 millimeters. That's finer than a human hair and even difficult to see with the naked eye. Experts all agree that this artifact displays the essence of 8th century unified Silla period metalwork.
Delicately having all the elements one would want with flawless technology, it is not an exaggeration to say this is a global-level craftwork.
Experts say gold leaf engraved with these patterns also reveals Western influences, but ones which have been transformed in Silla's own unique way.
We can see the outstanding craftsmanship of Silla artisans from that time, showing the pinnacle of metalwork technology and the culture of that time. I hope this artifact can trigger more research on Silla period metal craftwork.
This outstanding relic will be on display for the public at the Gyeongju National Research Institute of Cultural Heritage until October 31st through an exhibition titled The Blooming Flowers and Birds on 3cm Gold Leaf. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korean pianist Lim Yun-chan has been crowned the winner of the 2022 Van Choburn International Piano Competition, becoming the youngest ever gold medalist in the so-called Olympics of Piano. The 18-year-old, who started competing as a pianist at 14, played Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 3 and Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Im will receive a prize of $100,000 along with 3 years of personal career management, including U.S. and international concert tours, and he'll record a studio album. Russian pianist Anna Janashine took the silver, and the bronze medal went to Ukrainian pianist Dmytro Chony. Now, here in South Korea, scientists are now able to do medical research using artificial organs made using stem cell technology. This could certainly greatly reduce the need to test on animals. Cho Sung-min has more.
South Korean researchers have developed artificial tonsils which can be used to conduct more precise medicinal trials. Made using stem cell tissue from human tonsils, these artificial tonsils are biologically no different from the real thing. Because of this, the developers say using their product vastly improves the precision of the results of any clinical test compared to those done on animals.
It reacts in a similar way to how our bodies would. It's meaningful as it's a model that can be used to test various treatments.
Another local biotech company came up with a synthetic chip designed to emulate a human heart. It uses heart cells grown using human stem cells, and when looking under a microscope, the chip can be seen beating like a real heart. And when vein and nerve cells are added, developers explain that more sophisticated heart tests can be carried out.
We plan to develop a multi-chip that connects the liver, heart, and other organs to build a platform that can replace animal and even clinical tests in the future.
While much work is left to be done for these new technologies to be fully commercialized, they are evaluated as a way to reduce and even replace animal testing. 조성민, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. In various parts of the world, we're seeing geopolitical and military conflict, as well as uncertainty, with worrying signs of escalation, particularly as new security threats emerge. And global cooperation is sorely needed at this point to build dialogue for peace. And today we invite an expert who has been at the forefront of such efforts. Dan Smith is a British author and peace researcher who has been the director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute since 2015. Dan Smith has been a leading voice on global peace and security, not only when it comes to interstate conflicts, but also climate change, gender issues and food security. As for the Korean Peninsula, his organisation has worked with the Swedish government to organise a working-level meeting between the two Koreas and the United States in January 2019. And last year, he was awarded the Jeju April 3rd Peace Prize here in the country for his efforts to restore dialogue and denuclearisation and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Very warm welcome to you, Director Smith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, this year, actually, you're in Seoul to participate in the World Emerging Security Forum 2022, being organised by the Korean government. And, well, as a key participant there, what are you really hoping to see? What kind of discussions are you hoping to see come out of this?
Well, I think this forum is a really important initiative, both because it brings Northeast Asia into the forefront of the security discussions, and because it focuses onto the new areas like cyber technology, the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in both defensive and potentially offensive weapon systems. It looks at outer space and so on. I think the big focus right now is to think about cybersecurity and the problems which arise there, both in daily life, but for intergovernmental relations as well.
I see, and in recent years, the world has been through many different kind of challenges, as we all know. And well, how has the concept of security really evolved since then? And what kind of role do you see South Korea playing in order to contribute to these, countering these growing challenges?
Well, I think, we've always thought about security in terms of armed forces and state to state. And then we had to obviously broaden the horizon from that to start thinking about intra-state warfare, civil wars, because most armed conflicts since the Second World War have been within states rather than between them. But I think now we've found we need to broaden the understanding even further, because the reasons why armed conflicts arise are not just to do with political ambition, rivalry, lust for power, and all of that, which we've seen throughout history, but also because of the impact of climate change, the environmental crisis, food insecurity and so on, which destabilize societies, lead to instability. So we've got a much broader concept of security. And then within that, we're seeing new instruments. I mean, it's not just kinetic weapons, but the weapons which use force, but it's also cyber weapons. And then, of course, there's also the use of information warfare. So in many dimensions, the concept of security and what we do in order to ensure it has been expanding in recent years.
Right, and South Korea has been aiming to expand its role in dialogue, really, international dialogue, in order to contribute more to the world, particularly under this Yoon administration. And well, what role do you see it playing in these security talks?
Well, first of all, I think that it's part of the evolution of South Korea since democratization, that it has understood. I mean, I think governments of both parties have increasingly understood that South Korea needs to play a role which is not just about the Korean Peninsula, not just about Northeast Asia, but also about global security as a whole. So South Korea has a role to play in the United Nations, in regional fora, in the Indo-Pacific. And I think it's that bigger screen that it's working on, bigger canvas that it needs to paint on, which I see the World Emerging Security Forum as being a part of.
Right, and certainly at the forum you'll be, I'm sure, discussing about how the concept of security has been expanding to these non-traditional areas of security. And well, in terms of traditional threats, though, we heard some worrying reports from your institute, actually, that despite some progress that we saw last year in terms of dialogue in nuclear arms control, countries are actually increasing their stockpiles of nuclear arms. And does this mean that, well, do you think nuclear deterrence is going to work, or do you think the increasing number of arms indicates that these dialogues and these treaties or global institutions, that they're actually failing?
Well, I think two parts to the answer to that. The first thing is that there are 9 states that own nuclear weapons now, and all of them are in one sense or another modernizing and enhancing, improving their nuclear arsenals. So there has been a long-term fall in the number of nuclear warheads worldwide. And this has been a major achievement that caused for great optimism for several decades. From the mid-1980s, when there were about 70,000 nuclear warheads worldwide, there's now about 12,700, according to our latest data. That is enough to effectively destroy life as we know it, but it's still a major reduction compared to what it was during the Cold War. But we see that process now as essentially coming to an end. We see the decline beginning to bottom out, and we see the number of operationally deployed nuclear warheads, the ones which are actually on the bombers and the missiles, beginning to increase. So that's worrying. And something needs to be done about that. And when the geopolitical atmosphere is as toxic as it is at the moment, and when basically Western diplomats and Russian diplomats are not talking to each other, then it's hard to see what the way forward will be to achieve the next steps of arms control and arms reduction. But the other thing, I think, is that it's always not probable that there will be a nuclear war. It would be a stupid thing to do. All 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council agreed in a public statement made in January of this year. They echoed what Reagan and Gorbachev said in 1985. Nuclear war can never be won, and therefore it must never be fought. But at the same time, when you have this toxic, tense, hostile atmosphere, then I think the risk of miscommunication and accident, so war not happening on purpose, but kind of stumbling blindly, accidentally into war, that seems to me to be the major risk.
It is very concerning because we're hearing very thinly disguised threats about the possibility of a nuclear attack.
Well, I think not even really thinly disguised.
Exactly.
I mean, I think Russia's president and spokespeople have come straight out and said that they would do it because they know that it's a threat to wave in the faces of everybody that could constrain other states' behavior. But I still think, even so, that the deliberate launching of nuclear war is improbable. What I worry about is that those kinds of statements heat up the atmosphere, and then people maybe in crisis don't think straight. If they see what they think looks like a nuclear attack, maybe they react too fast.
Exactly, and the way they communicate this, the messaging is very important. And well, NATO, they're gathering in Spain at the end of the month, and they'll be launching their new strategic concept. And well, we're seeing they'll be inviting countries from the Indo-Pacific, including South Korea, of course. And well, do you see the two kind of US traditional alliances coming together? How do you think they will really approach this new strategic concept?
I think on the surface they're coming together, but I think that underneath the surface there's still bubbling along a lot of uncertainty, some fractiousness between members of the NATO alliance in any case. And I think, of course, we know that there are issues in Northeast Asia which continue to divide the USA's traditional allies here. I think on the other side of the divide, between the Russia, China, North Korea, other potential allies, there's also a lot of fractiousness. So I don't think that there are these two really solid blocks. But what I hope happens when NATO gets together in Madrid at the end of the month, as you said, is that somebody is standing up and saying, look, we cannot go on with just kind of freezing out the Russians and trying to pretend that Russia is not there and not part of the the international setup. It's a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It can veto anything. There's a review conference of the Non-Proliferation Treaty coming up in August. If Western diplomats and Russian diplomats won't talk to each other, then I think it's going to be a disaster. So we really need somebody, and it could be South Korea, but I hope it will be others as well, standing forward and saying, look, we need some good old-fashioned diplomacy, quiet communication, because we need to handle a very dangerous situation as seriously and in as responsible and adult a way as we can manage.
Right, and of course, as you mentioned, President Yoon, the South Korean president, will be in the room when that NATO summit happens. And how do you see South Korea really contributing to that summit, especially when it comes to areas like cybersecurity?
Well, I think, first of all, I think South Korea will probably in part be in a listening mode. I think it will also be in networking mode. But I think South Korea has a lot to offer in terms of the knowledge, the technical knowledge about these emerging security threats, challenges, and instruments that we have. So I think that there will possibly be a degree of cooperation in the cyberspace between NATO Centre of Excellence in Estonia and the new centre which are emerging in Northeast Asia. And then on top of that, as I say, I really just hope that South Korea and other participants from outside of the NATO alliance will be encouraging NATO to understand that there must be diplomatic contact. There must be dialogue. These issues are too big to be taking up, kind of taking poses and postures about. You've got to get down to some serious work.
And of course, security dialogue really starts at home for South Korea because of the chronic threat that we face from North Korea. And well, how do you assess the nuclear capability of the North Korean regime right now, and with its continued provocations that we've seen throughout this year, just dozens of them? How far do you think it will go, I suppose?
Well, we think that North Korea has got enough weapons material for more than 40 nuclear warheads, but we think it has only constructed 20. And that's based on what we can understand about its nuclear industry, its nuclear technology, how much material it has, and so on. Now, seen from a North Korean point of view, the preeminent military superpower in the world, the USA, is clearly its adversary. And it has argued, therefore, that it needs the nuclear deterrent, just as other states have a nuclear deterrent. Seen from a South Korean, a Japanese, US, or indeed a global point of view, it looks very different. And this is so often the case that what one side justifies in terms of security, the other side understands in terms of power. What one side sees as defensive, the other side sees as maybe being aggressive. So the Korean Peninsula has become a kind of a fundamental area of military confrontation in the way that Germany was during the Cold War. And that situation needs to be handled with a great deal of care. I think we should try to get back as soon as it's possible to be discussing again with North Korea as they come out of the COVID pandemic. We need to be discussing confidence and security building measures again. We need just to be talking and to be finding out more about concerns. We need to be cooling things as much as we can rather than heating them.
I see, and well, you've helped facilitate dialogue between the two Koreas and the US as well back in 2019, and 2019, and
yeah.
There have been a series of talks really over the past 3 decades, and many attempts, many different approaches by the US and South Korean administrations, but all of these have not led to denuclearization or any tangible progress. So what do you think now is really the way forward in engaging the regime, which doesn't seem to be interested at all in talking?
Well, I think that the regime is interested in talking, but it's interested in talking on its terms. And it needs to learn that a conversation happens on terms which are mutually agreeable about topics which are mutually important. But that means that there must be, in a sense, pre-talks. And I think that's where sort of we come in, that we can listen, we can interpret, we can understand, we can try to help find that common ground, which is not in the first place a common ground of agreement. It's just a common ground of settling on what it is that you actually want to talk about. It's kind of agreeing the agenda rather than the outcome. And we were making progress towards that in 2018 and 2019. And since then, as you said, it's slipped very much away. And I think that that's contributed to the general feeling of danger and insecurity in the world. There is no magic formula. There is no wand to wave to bring things back together again. It's just hard work and being ready. And we've certainly signalled to the North Korean regime that as soon as it is willing to and finds it possible, we want to be back in the kind of contact with them that we were before, because we think that performs a service for everybody's benefit.
And well, during your week here in Seoul, you're going to be speaking about the environment of peace at the World Emerging Security Forum here in Seoul. And well, how does a green transition really promote or foster peace?
Well, I think there's a number of different ways in which climate change and the broader environmental crisis feed conflict and insecurity. And conflict and insecurity feed environmental deterioration and the problems of climate change. And we don't have time to go into those. There's an 85-page report, which we refer to as the short report, right, which sets that out. Now, basically what we can conclude from that, sort of environment and peace are so closely interlinked that if you damage one, you damage the other. But the great thing is that they're so closely interlinked that if you enhance one, you enhance the other. So positive work for peace equals positive work for the environment. And there's a number of different things that can be done. We need to learn how to have better foresight. We need to be adapting to the impact of climate change as it unfolds. And then we need to make this transition, the green transition, so that we decarbonize our economies. But what we have to understand, and our research has also unearthed this, is that there are several risks in that transition. There will be losers as well as winners. It's going to be a huge economic transformation. We must make that transition, but we must make it carefully. So what we talk about is the importance of a just and peaceful green transition.
Right, so peace and environment really goes hand in hand. It's
Absolutely,
a symbiotic relationship and something that's not emphasised enough. So we look forward to hearing more about that at the forum. Well, thank you so much today for your time, Director Dan Smith.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Landslides and flooding caused by heavy monsoon rains over the weekend in Bangladesh and India have left dozens dead and millions homeless. Experts have said that this could be Bangladesh's worst flood since 2004. According to officials, at least 21 people were killed by lightning strikes since Friday, while another 4 were killed by landslides, and around 3 million have been displaced. Meanwhile, authorities in India's Assam state have said that since Thursday, 18 people have died in the floods, while 2 million more have lost their homes. Over 100 Apple workers at a store in the U.S. state of Maryland have successfully voted to unionize, making them the first such union at the tech giant. The measure was passed on Saturday in a vote of 65 for and 33 against, alongside a handful of abstentions. 2 other Apple stores in New York and Atlanta are also in the process of launching their own unions. In an open letter penned to the company in May, the Apple Core Union said that its aim is to improve workers' rights without causing management conflict. According to union leaders, employees at over 24 Apple stores have expressed interest in unionizing as well. Hundreds of people have demonstrated in the Tunisian capital of Tunis against the president's efforts to hold a constitutional referendum. The second day of protests on Sunday saw demonstrators oppose the referendum called by President Kais Saied. His political opponents say the measure could lead to Saied clutching onto power in the country. The weekend protests follow a strike on Thursday against economic reform plans, which led to a near-nationwide standstill. The referendum planned for July 25th is said to be boycotted by many of Tunisia's political parties. The Brazilian city of Sao Paulo has seen the return of the largest Pride event in South America. The event had been held online for the past 2 years due to COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands of people poured into Sao Paulo's Avenida Paulista on Sunday in celebration of the 2022 LGBTQ+ event. According to the parade's director, roughly 5 million people were expected to attend. This year, the focus of the parade was on voting awareness and the upcoming October presidential election. Swimming's global governing body, FINA, announced on Sunday that it passed a vote to restrict transgender women from participating in elite female competitions. In a vote cast by 152 national federations during the Budapest Swimming World Championships, 71% backed the measure. The decision follows a scientific report which indicated that even after medically lowering their testosterone levels, transgender women still have an advantage over cisgender female swimmers. A new category will be created that allows male to female transgender athletes to compete. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Those in Gyeongsangbdo provinces and surrounding regions, including Daegu, need to brace for another searing heat wave. A heat advisory remains in place with temperatures expected to go up as high as Sunday, and elsewhere we'll also notice a big rise in daytime highs. Well, high humidity will make it feel hotter than actual temperatures, and passing rain is in the forecast in many inland regions, while Jeju Island is forecast to receive the season's first monsoon rain this evening. Morning temperatures are in the low 20s in most parts. It's a sunnier start for southern parts of the country this morning. Then highs in Seoul will be 5 degrees higher, topping out at 30 degrees Celsius, normal to good air quality nationwide today. Meanwhile, weather conditions don't seem to be much of a problem in Gongin Jeolladamdo province, where the Dado Space Center is located, though light rain is in the forecast early tomorrow morning. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back tomorrow for our Tuesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thank you for tuning in, and do stick around for more updates in our later newscasts. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.